Have you ever made a snap decision, so fast, so instinctive, that it felt like your brain was on autopilot? Maybe you instantly disliked someone without knowing why, or you sensed danger before you even saw it, or you picked the right answer on a test without being able to explain it. What if I told you that your brain is making these calculations all the time, quietly, invisibly, in the blink of an eye? And what if I told you that sometimes it's dead wrong? Think of your mind like a high-speed supercomputer, running millions of background processes without you even noticing. It takes in a flood of information: body language, facial expressions, tones of voice, patterns, tiny details you don't consciously register, and spits out a verdict before you've even had time to think. But here's where it gets weird. Sometimes those lightning-fast decisions are more accurate than hours of analysis. Other times, they're corrupted by hidden biases, snap judgments, and flawed instincts that lead to disaster. This is the paradox at the heart of Blink, a book that shatters the illusion that rational, slow thinking is always superior. It reveals how the unconscious mind is both our greatest ally and our most deceptive trickster, how firefighters can sense a building collapse before it happens, how art experts can detect a forgery in a split second without knowing why, how doctors, athletes, soldiers, even speed-dating couples make life-altering choices in an instant. But here's what's truly shocking. Those instincts, the ones that feel so certain, so undeniable, they can be poisoned, they can be manipulated, they can lead to fatal errors, injustice, and deception. And the most terrifying part, you won't even realize it's happening. So how do we know when to trust our instincts and when to challenge them? How do we separate brilliant intuition from blind bias? The answer isn't just fascinating, it's crucial, because the decisions we make in an instant can change everything. Imagine walking into a room and within seconds knowing something is off. You can't explain it, you can't put your finger on it, but deep down, you just know. Maybe it's the way someone avoids eye contact. Maybe it's the faintest hesitation in their voice. Maybe it's the eerie stillness of a place that should be buzzing with life. Your brain picks up on tiny, imperceptible clues and delivers a verdict before you've even formed a conscious thought. This is thin slicing, the brain's uncanny ability to extract meaning from the smallest slivers of experience. It's what allows a seasoned poker player to spot a bluff in an instant. It's why an ER doctor can glance at a patient and diagnose a heart attack before the test results come in. It's why art experts can take one look at a painting and just know it's fake, while a team of scientists armed with years of research and lab tests might get it completely wrong. One of the most famous examples of this comes from the world of fine art. In the 1980s, the J. Paul Getty Museum in California was presented with a stunning ancient Greek statue, a kouros, that seemed almost too good to be true. The museum spent months testing it. Geologists analyzed the marble, scientists examined the weathering, art historians combed through its provenance. Everything checked out. The museum paid nearly $10 million for it. But then, something strange happened. A few art experts, people who had spent their lives around ancient sculptures, took one look at the statue and felt uneasy. They didn't have lab results, they didn't have documents, they didn't have time to analyze it. They simply sensed that something was off. One historian described it as a gut feeling. Another said the statue looked wrong. They couldn't explain why, but their instincts told them the kouros wasn't ancient at all. Turns out, they were right. The statue was a forgery. A masterful one, scientifically convincing, but still fake. And these experts, relying on nothing but a single glance, had figured it out in seconds. How? Because their minds were trained to thin slice. Years of exposure to real ancient sculptures had wired their brains to pick up on tiny subconscious details that didn't fit. The way the stone reflected light, the posture, the texture, things too small to notice consciously, but deeply familiar on an instinctive level. This isn't just some rare superpower reserved for art historians and poker players. We all do this, all the time. A therapist can read a marriage's fate in a few minutes of conversation. A seasoned police officer can sense when someone is about to run. A musician can tell when an instrument is even slightly out of tune without needing a tuner. And sometimes these split-second judgments are more accurate than hours of analysis. But here's where it gets tricky. Thin slicing only works when we have experience, expertise, exposure. A firefighter with 20 years on the job might feel the floor beneath him and instantly know the building is about to collapse. But someone with no training, that gut feeling is just a guess. So the question is, how do we sharpen this ability? How do we train ourselves to see the invisible patterns, to recognize the subtle signals that separate intuition from mere hunches? And perhaps more importantly, when should we not trust our instincts at all? We like to think of intuition as a kind of superpower, an inner voice guiding us toward the right decision without needing to stop and think. But what if that voice isn't always looking out for us? What if, instead of leading us to truth, it sometimes whispers lies in our ears? What if our gut instincts, so fast, so certain, are actually tricking us? History is full of moments where intuition failed spectacularly. Take Warren Harding. In the early 20th century, Harding looked exactly like what people thought a president should look like. Tall, broad-shouldered, a square jaw, deep voice. He felt presidential, and in the 1920 election, Americans followed that instinct, voting him into office in a landslide. There was just one problem. Harding was, by nearly every measure, one of the worst presidents in U.S. He was incompetent, corrupt, and utterly unprepared for the job. But his appearance, his sheer presence, had overridden logic, allowing a collective gut feeling to override real qualifications. This is what Malcolm Gladwell calls the Warren Harding error, when our brains mistake familiarity, attractiveness, or confidence for actual competence. We see a well-dressed, charismatic job candidate and assume they're brilliant. We trust a smooth talker over a shy genius. We assume an expensive product is higher quality than a cheaper one, even when they're identical. We think we're making rational choices, but really, we're being played by our own subconscious. The truth is, intuition is a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's a finely honed tool that lets experts recognize patterns at lightning speed. Other times it's just a glorified shortcut, a lazy brain hack that fills in the blanks based on assumptions, stereotypes, and past experiences. And when it fails, the results can be catastrophic. Take police shootings. There have been tragic cases where officers, in the heat of the moment, thought they saw a gun. They didn't stop to analyze. They didn't question their instincts. Their gut told them there was a weapon, and they pulled the trigger. Only later did they realize that what they thought was a gun was actually a wallet or a phone or nothing at all. Their rapid decision-making, shaped by years of subconscious bias and fear, turned a split-second judgment into a fatal mistake. Or consider the famous study on job applications. Researchers sent out identical resumes, same qualifications, same experience. The only difference? The names. Some had names like Emily or Greg, others had names like Jamal or Lakeisha. The result? The resumes with white-sounding names got significantly more callbacks, despite being identical to the others. Employers thought they were making rational hiring decisions, but their unconscious biases were making those decisions for them. This is the dark side of intuition. It can be shaped by culture, media, past experiences, all the things we don't even realize are influencing us. And yet, when we make these snap judgments, we trust them completely. So how do we know when our instincts are serving us and when they're sabotaging us? The answer isn't to abandon intuition altogether. It's to question it, to recognize that just because a thought feels right doesn't mean it is right. The next time you get a strong gut feeling, whether it's about a person, a decision, or a situation, ask yourself, is this instinct based on real expertise? Or is it just an assumption dressed up as truth? Because sometimes the smartest thing you can do is to slow down and think. We live in an age that worships data. More research, more analysis, more information. This is how we're told to make the best decisions. But what if that's wrong? What if, instead of making us smarter, too much information is actually making us worse at thinking? Imagine you're in an emergency room. A patient comes in clutching their chest, sweating, short of breath. It could be a heart attack, or maybe it's just indigestion. The obvious solution? Run every test possible. Blood work, x-rays, stress tests, full medical history, a battery of screenings. The more data we gather, the better the diagnosis, right? Not exactly. A study done at Cook County Hospital in Chicago proved something shocking. Doctors made better diagnoses when they had less information. Instead of running dozens of tests and analyzing every tiny detail, doctors were trained to focus on just 3 key factors: chest pain type, ECG results, and blood pressure. That's it. And when they did this, they became significantly more accurate in detecting real heart attacks while reducing unnecessary admissions. This is the paradox of too much information. It feels like we're making a smarter choice when we analyze every detail. But in reality, excess data often clouds our judgment, distracts us from the most important signals, and leads to decision paralysis. Think about a military commander trying to assess an unfolding battle. The more intelligence reports flood in, the harder it becomes to see the bigger picture. Or an investor drowning in stock charts, market forecasts, expert predictions, so much so that they miss the single most important trend. Or maybe a person in a grocery store staring at 50 brands of peanut butter, overwhelmed by the sheer number of choices, leaving empty-handed because it was just too much. The classic example of this comes from a now famous psychological experiment. In a high-end supermarket, researchers set up 2 tasting booths for jam. One table had 6 flavors, the other had 24. Conventional logic would suggest that more options would lead to more sales. People love variety, right? But the opposite happened. People were 10 times more likely to buy when they had fewer options. More choices didn't empower them, it paralyzed them. The same thing happens with decision-making. The brain works best when it filters out noise and focuses only on what matters. When too much data floods in, it doesn't sharpen our instincts, it drowns them. Here's the problem. We've been conditioned to believe that smart people always gather more information before making a decision. But in reality, the best decision makers are the ones who know what to ignore. A seasoned firefighter doesn't need to study blueprints and structural reports before realizing a building is about to collapse. A grandmaster chess player doesn't analyze every possible move. They instinctively hone in on just a few. A skilled recruiter doesn't need an applicant's entire work history to know if they're a good fit, just a few key details. So the next time you're facing a tough decision, ask yourself, am I really gaining insight or am I just adding noise? Because sometimes knowing less helps you see more. We like to believe that great instincts are something you're born with, that some people just have a gift. The firefighter who senses a building collapse before it happens, the poker player who spots a bluff in an instant, the doctor who makes a life-saving diagnosis without even looking at the test results. But here's the truth, intuition isn't magic, it's a skill. And like any skill, it can be trained, sharpened, and refined over time. Think of the mind like a vast database, constantly collecting information from every experience we've ever had. Each time we see a pattern, a behavior, a cause and effect relationship, the brain logs it away, often without us even realizing it. The more we're exposed to a particular field, the more refined this database becomes. And eventually, with enough experience, the brain can make lightning-fast calculations based on that stored knowledge. Take chess masters. When a beginner looks at a chessboard, they see individual pieces scattered across 64 squares. A grandmaster? They don't see individual pieces at all. They see patterns, entire formations that their brain has stored from thousands of past games. This is why a master can glance at a board for just a few seconds and instantly know the best move, because their brain has seen something like this before, and it already knows the answer. Or consider firefighters. In one famous case, a lieutenant led his team into a burning house where the kitchen was fully engulfed in flames. They started spraying water, but something felt off. The fire wasn't behaving the way it should. Without understanding why, the lieutenant suddenly shouted for his team to get out. Seconds later, the floor collapsed. How did he know? At first, he couldn't explain it. But later, after analyzing the event, he realized that the fire had been too quiet. The heat was intense, but the flames weren't spreading the way they should have. His subconscious had picked up on a crucial detail. The fire wasn't coming from the kitchen, it was coming from the basement below them. He didn't consciously register it, but years of experience had wired his brain to recognize the signs. This is what separates an expert's intuition from a lucky guess. It's not just gut feeling, it's a database of thousands of past experiences, all running silently in the background, allowing them to spot patterns and anomalies in a fraction of a second. But here's the catch. Intuition only works when it's trained. A seasoned doctor can diagnose a rare disease at a glance, but a first-year medical student can't. A veteran investor can sense when the market is about to crash, but an amateur will mistake noise for a signal. Without experience, what feels like intuition is often just guessing. So how do you develop expert intuition? The answer isn't just repetition, it's deliberate exposure. The more high-quality, varied experiences you collect, the stronger your pattern recognition becomes. A surgeon who has performed 10,000 operations doesn't just get better at surgery. They get better at recognizing the subtle signs of a complication before it even happens. A journalist who has covered hundreds of political scandals learns to detect when a politician is lying, not by analyzing every word, but by noticing tiny shifts in behavior, tone, or phrasing. In short, expertise isn't about working harder. It's about learning smarter. It's about exposing yourself to meaningful patterns over time and letting your brain do what it does best. Recognize them. So the next time you marvel at someone's uncanny ability to predict an outcome or make a split-second decision with unshakable confidence, remember, they weren't born with it. They built it. And so can you. Snap judgments can be powerful. They can save lives, prevent disasters, and reveal truths that slow, deliberate thinking might overlook. But they can also destroy lives, fuel injustice, and lead us to catastrophic mistakes, all without us realizing it. The problem? Our brains don't just make quick decisions, they trust them. Completely. And when those snap judgments are wrong, the consequences can be devastating. Take police shootings. In multiple tragic cases, officers have shot unarmed individuals because in the heat of the moment, they thought they saw a weapon. Their gut told them they were in danger. Their instincts screamed at them to react, but their instincts were wrong. And once that trigger is pulled, there's no undoing the mistake. Or consider hiring decisions. Imagine two resumes land on a recruiter's desk. Same qualifications, same experience, but one has the name Emily, the other Lakeisha. Study after study has shown that Emily will get more callbacks, simply because her name feels familiar, safe, trustworthy. The recruiter doesn't consciously believe they're being biased. In fact, they probably think they're being objective. But their snap judgment, shaped by years of cultural conditioning, is making the decision for them. This is the dark side of rapid cognition. Our brains take shortcuts, sometimes useful, sometimes dangerous. They're influenced by everything from stereotypes to personal experiences, from media portrayals to fleeting emotions. And yet we rarely stop to ask, is this instinct actually correct? One of the most shocking examples of this comes from the world of classical music. For centuries, the greatest orchestras in the world were overwhelmingly male. Why? Because the general belief, shared by even the most well-meaning judges, was that men simply played better. Their sound was richer, their technique stronger. But in the 1970s and 80s, something changed. Orchestras started using blind auditions. Musicians would perform behind a screen, completely unseen by the judges. And suddenly, the number of women being accepted skyrocketed. What changed? The quality of the music hadn't. The skill of female musicians hadn't suddenly improved overnight. What changed was that the judges' snap judgments, the ones they swore were based purely on talent, had been stripped of bias. This is why snap judgments, despite their power, must always be questioned. They are shaped by factors we don't see, biases we don't recognize, and errors we don't anticipate. So how do we protect ourselves from the dark side of intuition? The answer isn't to reject instincts altogether. It's to train them, to expose ourselves to diverse experiences, to challenge our assumptions, to consciously slow down in moments where a wrong judgment could be costly. Because while our brains may be wired to think fast, the smartest thing we can do is to pause. You might think you're in control of your thoughts, that every decision you make is deliberate, rational, your own. But what if I told you that right now, invisible forces are shaping your choices? That your mind is constantly being nudged, primed, manipulated, without you ever realizing it? Welcome to the world of priming. Imagine you're taking part in a simple experiment. You walk into a room and are asked to unscramble sentences. The words seem random: old, Florida, retired, gray, slow. You finish the task, stand up, and leave. But here's the catch. Researchers are secretly watching how fast you walk down the hallway. And if you worked with words related to aging, guess what? You're literally walking slower than you normally would. Your brain, subtly influenced by those words, has made you act older, without you even noticing. That's the power of priming. The smallest cues, words, images, sounds, can shift our behavior in ways that feel completely natural, but are anything but. And it's not just walking speed. In another study, people who were exposed to words related to rudeness, things like interrupt, bold, aggressive, were far more likely to cut someone off in conversation just minutes later. On the flip side, people who saw words related to politeness waited patiently, unaware that their behavior had been quietly shaped by something as simple as a word list. Think this only happens in labs? Think again. Imagine you're about to negotiate a deal. The meeting is set in a cold, sterile office, and the first thing handed to you is an iced coffee. Now imagine the same meeting, same conversation, same people. But instead of a cold drink, you're given a warm cup of coffee. The result? Studies show that people holding a warm drink tend to perceive others as warmer, more trustworthy, more likable. That tiny, meaningless detail, the temperature of a drink, can shift your entire perception of someone. This raises an unsettling question. How many of our daily choices aren't really ours at all? Marketers understand priming better than anyone. They know that the music playing in a grocery store affects what you buy. French music? You're more likely to purchase wine. Classical music? You suddenly feel classier and spend more. Want people to pick the healthier option? Put green labels on it, because our brains associate green with health. And it gets even crazier. Research has shown that voters are more likely to support school funding if the polling station is inside a school. That people are more likely to be charitable if they're near the scent of freshly baked cookies. That judges give harsher sentences right before lunch, because hunger affects judgment. None of these people think they're being influenced, but they are. We all are. So what does this mean? That we're helpless puppets controlled by our surroundings? Not exactly. It means we need to pay attention, because the more aware you are of priming, the more power you have over your own decisions. The next time you feel an urge, an impulse, a snap judgment, stop and ask yourself, is this really me, or is something else pulling the strings? We've seen both sides of intuition. The moments where it saves lives, spots truth in an instant, and makes us seem almost superhuman, and the moments where it fails catastrophically, clouded by bias, error, and manipulation. So the real question is, when should you trust your gut, and when should you ignore it completely? The answer isn't simple, but it is clear. Intuition is like a powerful but unpredictable tool, deadly in the wrong hands, invaluable in the right ones. And whether or not you should rely on it depends on one key factor: experience. Imagine you're in an airplane cockpit. The engines fail, the instruments flicker, warning alarms blare. A seasoned pilot, one who has logged thousands of hours in the air, won't sit there analyzing data, hesitating, overthinking. Their gut will tell them exactly what to do. Why? Because they've seen this before. Their intuition isn't magic, it's pattern recognition built from years of real-world exposure. Now put a beginner in that same cockpit. If they follow their instincts, they'll probably crash the plane, because their gut isn't pulling from experience, it's pulling from panic. This is the golden rule of intuition. You can trust your gut when you've trained it. Experts in any field, medicine, sports, business, law enforcement, develop something that feels like instinct, but is really just deeply embedded knowledge, running in the background like an advanced algorithm. A master chess player can make a move in seconds because they've seen thousands of similar positions before. A skilled investor can sense a market shift before it happens, not because they're guessing, but because they've unconsciously detected patterns that most people miss. But what about the rest of us? The people making everyday decisions, choosing a job, a business strategy, a relationship. When should we listen to our instincts? Here's when your gut is likely to be right. When you have deep experience in a field. When you're in a high-pressure situation you faced before. When you feel discomfort but can't immediately explain why. This can be a sign that your subconscious is picking up something real. And here's when your gut is dangerously wrong. when the decision is completely new to you, when your emotions are high, fear, excitement, anger, love, all distort judgment, when your choice could be influenced by bias or stereotypes, when you feel overconfident, because overconfidence is often the biggest sign that intuition is failing you. So the smartest way to use intuition? Test it. Challenge it. If your gut feeling is strong, ask yourself, why do I feel this way? Is this real knowledge or just a reaction? If you have experience, trust it. If you don't, slow down. Get more information. Let logic do what instinct cannot. Because intuition isn't about always being right. It's about knowing when you are.